This is Crimson Desert on Base PS5, and this is PS5 Pro. Digital Foundry called this the biggest gap they have ever seen, but Pearl Abyss has been patching aggressively. The question is, did they close the gap? What's up, everyone? The latest patches just dropped for Crimson Desert, and they add FSR upscaling to the base PS5. A new 4K output toggle, improved hair rendering, and waterfall fixes. So I tested every graphics mode on both PS5 and PS5 Pro side by side to see if the gap is still as massive as everyone says. I will show you the best settings for each console at the end. Let's get into it. Before we compare, here's what changed. The biggest addition is the new fixed 4K output option on base PS5. The game now uses FSR to intelligently upscale the image in performance mode instead of just stretching a 1080p render to fill the screen. Hair and fur rendering is improved. Waterfall animation that used to freeze are fixed. And screen noise during long sessions is gone. These are real improvements. But the question is whether they are enough to close the gap with PS5 Pro. Let's find out. First, the new 4K output toggle. Here's base PS5 performance mode without the toggle. The game renders at 1080p internally and just stretches it to fill the 4K output. No FSR, no smart upscaling. It looks soft and blurry. And here it is with the toggle. Same 1080p internal render, but now FSR is intelligently upscaling the image. The difference is significant. Without FSR, Digital Foundry compared it to a Switch game. With FSR, it's actually usable now. But how does it compare to PS5 Pro? And here's PS5 Pro with PSSR 2.0 at the same spot. Even with FSR on base PS5, the Pro's PSSR still delivers a noticeably cleaner image. The gap is smaller than it was at launch, but it's still there. The beard and hair rendering was improved in this patch, but look at the detail difference. The Pro with PSSR 2.0 resolves individual hairs that FSR on the base PS5 still blurs together. Foliage is where you really see the upscaling difference. The base PS5 has visible shimmering on distant leaves. The Pro is significantly cleaner. Pop-in is also more aggressive on base PS5. Indoor lighting. This is where ray tracing quality matters. The Pro keeps medium ray tracing even in performance mode. The base PS5 drops to low. Look at how light bounces off these stone walls. Completely different. Now let's talk about combat. This is the base PS5 in performance mode, fighting a group of bandits. In regular encounters like this, the base PS5 actually holds better than I expected. Digital Foundry reported massive frame drops during boss battles, sometimes as low as 10 frames per second. But in standard combat against a handful of enemies, the frame rate stayed mostly stable. What you will notice though is the image quality during fast movements. When the camera is swinging around and particle effects are flying, the lack of PSSR really shows on base PS5. The image gets softer and you lose a lot of that fine detail. Character edges gets blurry, distance objects shimmer more. It's still very playable, but you can feel the 1080p internal resolution struggling to keep up with all the action on the screen. The frame rate on the Pro also slightly felt more consistent throughout. Not a massive difference in these small fights, but enough that the gameplay felt smoother overall. Where you would really see the gap is in the bigger boss encounters later in the game, where dozens of enemies are on screen at once. For regular combats like this, both consoles get the job done, but the Pro just looks and feels cleaner while doing it. So the honest takeaway on combat. The base PS5 is absolutely playable in regular fights. The real frame rate problem happens in the larger set pieces that stress the CPU. But the visual quality gap between the two consoles is noticeable even in normal gameplay. Balanced mode at 40 FPS. On the base PS5, it renders internally at 1280p and uses FSR3 to upscale to 4K. On the Pro, it renders at 1440p and PSSR 2.0 upscales to 4K. That higher internal resolution on the Pro makes a visible difference. Look at the beard detail. FSR from 1280p is noticeably softer than PSSR from 1440p. In the forest, balanced mode still shows pop-in on both consoles, but it's worse on base PS5. Foliage and terrain can morph onto the screen in mid-distance. The Pro handles this better. Vegetation holds its detail at longer range. Balanced is the recommended mode for most players on both consoles. It's the best compromise between visuals and frame rate. Quality mode is where the gap narrows the most. Base PS5 renders at 1440p upscale to 4K with FSR3 at 30 FPS. The Pro runs at native 4K at 30 FPS with ultra ray tracing. Both look good here, but look at the shadow on Cliff's face on the Pro. You can see some shimmering on the shadow edges, even at native 4K. The denoiser still struggles with high contrast transitions. This is where quality mode shows the biggest difference. Both consoles have their ray tracing cranked up here. High on base PS5, ultra on the Pro. Look at the torchlight bouncing off the stone walls. The Pro's ultra ray tracing creates softer, more natural light fall off with more accurate shadow edges. On the base PS5, lighting is still good, noticeably better than the performance mode's low ray tracing, but the indirect bounced light isn't as refined. Small details like the way firelight wraps around wooden beams and fills the corner of the hallway. That's where ultra ray tracing on the Pro pulls ahead. If you care about atmosphere and lighting, this is the mode and the scene that makes the strongest case for the Pro. The waterfall animation freeze from launch is now fixed. Also compare the water reflections. The Pro renders them more cleanly at native 4K. Water effects were specifically called out by reviewers as being tuned down on base PS5 in performance and balanced modes. In quality mode, both consoles get the full water rendering. but the Pro's resolution advantage still shows in the surface detail. So the patch fixed a lot, but some things to keep in mind. In regular combat, both consoles held well. I didn't see any major frame drops fighting bandits. But Digital Foundry reported that larger boss encounters with dozens of enemies can still tank the frame rate on both consoles. Indoor lighting is better than at launch, but still not perfect. And performance mode on base PS5, even with FSR, now still has noticeable pop-in and softer image quality compared to the Pro. One more thing to note on the PS5 Pro. PSSR 2.0 introduces some ghosting artifacts, but it's only visible in a very specific situations. When you slowly pan the camera with bright clouds behind your characters, you can see the trailing edges around cliff. And in the dark indoor areas, the ghosting shows up around shadow edges. In normal gameplay, combat, and general exploration, you won't notice it at all. It's a minor trade-off for the massive image quality upgrade PSSR provides. Perlabase has been patching aggressively though. Multiple patches in first 2 weeks. That is an impressive feat. But these are the things that could improve further. Here's my recommendation. For base PS5, play on balanced mode. It gives you 40 FPS with much better image quality than performance. Make sure the new fixed 4K output toggle is on and turn off 120Hz output in your PS5 system settings. There's a known bug that makes the game blurrier when it's enabled. For PS5 Pro, performance mode with PSSR 2.0 is the way to play. 60 FPS with a clean upscale 4K image, you'll notice minor ghosting around edges in specific lighting conditions, but it's a small trade-off for a massive image quality upgrade. Quality mode is gorgeous at native 4K, but 30 FPS feels sluggish for combat. If you want the best of both worlds, balanced at 40 FPS is excellent too. Gap between these two consoles is still the biggest I have seen this generation. The latest patches improved the base PS5 significantly. FSR upscaling makes performance mode looks much cleaner than the stretch 1080p image it had at launch. But the PS5 Pro with PSSR 2.0 is still in a different league. If you have been on the fence about Pro, Crimson Desert makes the strongest case for it yet. If this helped you pick the right settings, drop a like. It helps more than you think. Let me know in the comments which console you're playing on and which mod you use. If you want to see my next patch comparison, when Perlabase drops another update, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Thank you.